Today, we are here to talk about a book that I've been very, very excited about. This book has been leading into its launch with many different miniseries with Duke, Cobra Commander, Scarlet, and Destro. We have been leading into the arrival of G.I. Joe #1, available on shelves November 13th, from Joshua Williamson and Tom Reilly. We are lucky enough to have both of them here with us today. Now, how are both of you doing?
It's good. It's good. Yeah. Busy, but good. You know, we just came back from New York Comic Con, and that was really a good time. We got to, talk about G.I. Joe to a lot of people and see the excited fans that are really pumped about the Energon Universe. But yeah, I'm good, dude. It's raining outside, but yeah, I'm trapped in this office for a while, just working away. But yeah, I'm doing good.
I'm doing good too. I had a guy fixing my water heater earlier that I totally forgot he was coming by, so I almost missed the interview. But I'm here. I'm also trapped in the office.
Are you going to have hot water at least today?
Well, now the heat in my whole house works. It only worked in one half, so now it all works.
Crazy.
That's a positive. That's
good. It's like it's so cold in my house though, and then I go outside and it's like really nice. I don't get it.
Yeah,
it's like that's so funny.
The insulation's good, I guess. That's what it means.
Yeah. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm great. I'm finally back into the swing of things, and I'm doing these interviews again. I actually read the entire G.I. Joe side of the Energon verse.
Oh, right on.
In a night 2 weeks ago.
Oh. Wow.
I just couldn't. I just started, and I just couldn't stop. And I got to read #1, which is incredible. Joshua, you've been here many times.
Yeah, good talk.
Tom, you have not.
This is my first time.
I don't know if you know, I'm a pretty hard-hitting journalist, so I start every interview with something pretty heavy. So I hope you're ready.
Bring it on.
What's your favorite sandwich?
Favorite sandwich? That's tough. Let me think. I do like a Reuben. A Reuben is good. I like a muffaletta from New Orleans, too. That's a good one.
Yeah.
But being a Chicago guy, I like the Italian beef sandwich from Chicago.
So good. What is a muffaletta?
It's like a sandwich that's just got a bunch of crap on it.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah,
a bunch of different meats, cheeses, jardiniere, like pickled vegetables, and it's on this giant roll. And you just cut it into like a pizza. You cut it into like triangles, and you just take a piece of this giant sandwich and you eat it.
Oh, man.
It's really good.
That sounds magical, actually. The Reuben, #1 sandwich amongst comic writers and artists.
It's
like statistically
reliable bar sandwich.
So funny.
It is,
but the Italian beef is it.
Yeah, Italian beef is awesome. Now, I couldn't leave you out, Josh. Which character from Cobra or G.I. Joe do you most want to see enter the ring?
Oh man! All right, we're getting into wrestling now. Ooh.
And what is their signature move?
I feel like there's obvious stuff we could do here. I feel like I'm looking around my office because it's like I feel like Cobra Commander is more of a manager than a wrestler. I feel like he's definitely not the type to get in the ring. He will. I mean, our version of Cobra Commander definitely does. Like you had that fight with him as a Immortal, but it's more of like what he absolutely has to, And there's a really cool fight scene with him that we get to in one of the issues coming up. But man, it's fine. I just got Road Pig, and I think Road Pig looks like a professional wrestler. I just got that toy in the mail yesterday. I mean, it's funny. I always I guess it depends. Like if it was the 80s, it'd be somebody like Shipwreck, right? Like he totally looks like 80s, like that version of wrestling. And then I'd have to figure out, I think with Shipwreck, he would do some kind of finishing move called like the Titanic or something, like I almost feel like it would be, or like he drowns you. So it'd almost be like, I feel like the Pedigree always kind of has that look of that, I almost feel like it would fit that. Then you get guys like Rock and Roll, but Rock and Roll is a surfer already.
Shipwreck would need the parrot. He'd be like Jake the Snake. He'd have like a parrot.
Yeah, Coco Beware had a parrot. He had that bird. Yeah. So I feel like...
And it would distract the wrestlers, and then he would...
Yeah.
Going for the
Armor, cool. Major Blood would be kind of fun. Major Blood is such a weirdo. A lot of people don't know this, but Major Blood writes poetry. And it's all really bad poetry, but he writes poetry. because you know how wrestling is, man. They always have like two gimmicks. It's never just the one; it's two, right? It's always like some kind of weird. It's always like a little bit of two things, and then it evolves into something else. Like you look at Triple H and him being like Hunter Hearst Helmsley and how that became Triple H, and then it became what we have now. It all feels. What's funny about that is even with him being the boss, it all still feels like an extension of the original Hunter Hearst Helmsley. It just feels like the actual
a trajectory.
Yeah, it totally tracks. Anyway, we can talk about wrestling all day.
The whole time I've been imagining Paul Heyman voiced Cobra Commander, but
dude, yeah.
Now,
he'd
be awesome.
Really,
our show is about making things more approachable. If you had to give an elevator pitch for your G.I. Joe book, say someone knows nothing about G.I. Joe other than it was one of the biggest toy cartoon lines ever. Yeah. How are you pitching them your book?
I mean, I think the first thing I would do with that, just really be honest with you, is I would just give them a copy of the book. I think I would try to let the book speak for itself, and I think that's one thing that's been, when we talk about this a lot, that's been really rewarding about this is people coming up to us at conventions and being like, I didn't know anything about this property. I knew it kind of existed, nothing else. But then being like, now I'm all in. Now I love it. It's like now they're super into it and they're buying the toys, they're buying the comics, they're getting deep into the mythology. Like that stuff is always really cool. So, I mean, honestly, it's like, I'm not even sure if I would tell somebody like an elevator pitch because G.I. Joe is so funny because like you could just sing the intro, which no, I'm not going to do that. But it's like, that's like almost the best sales pitch where it's like, oh, it's this team of people who are like this elite fighting force and they're going to save the world from Cobra. Oh, what's Cobra? It's this. It's funny. Like, and I think that's what's funny about G.I. Joe pitching it sometimes. It's almost like you start to spiral. You start to explain too much immediately. So I almost feel like what I would really want to do is I would just give Duke #1, which to us, that's the beginning for us. It's like, I know that we connect to Transformers, and this is something, to go back to what your original point, we talk about this a lot. And I'm a big believer in like comics need to be accessible. Comics need to have clear storytelling that anyone can pick it up, and I'm a big believer in like bigger the world, smaller the story. And this we talked to Robert about a lot when you go back and look at something like Invincible and how that book pretty much opens up where it's like Mark is like taking out the trash and gets powers and he's just having breakfast with his mom and dad. And it's like, and then when you look at that versus the end of that book and you're like, holy crap, this world is huge, right? Like that world became so massive over the 140 plus, I think it's 146 issues, right? It's like, that's the same thing we did here where we were like, let's start real, I don't want to say real small, but real accessible, right? Let's begin this book. And so that's what I would do. I would just give Duke #1. I probably just give the trade and be like, listen, just read it. Just give it a try because you're going to get all the information you need in the first issue. Like you're going to get brought into this world. And even if you don't know that it's this big old crazy world with this massive mythology, you're going to get enough in that first issue from Duke #1 to really like start bringing you into it in a way that I feel is, accessible. Like I think about this a lot with everything I work on. I try to make it accessible for people. Like I want you to, I think the only time I didn't do that was like Green Arrow. Cause I was like, this is for the nerds. This is for me. This is for me and my Green nerd. But for the most part, I always try to be like, how is the best way to bring you into the story? And I think it's a lot like, I obviously I'm really good friends with James Tinian, and him and I talk about this a lot, where it's like, when you read something that's clearly to children #1, it opened up not with monsters, secret societies and cults and all this stuff. It opened up with kids having a sleepover and playing truth or dare. And that is relatable as human. And I think about this a lot when I'm making my books, is making sure you open and try to tell a human story. And that's what we were doing with this book, is with Duke. We tried to tell you a very human story with Duke. And that's why we started with Duke and not Jack Joe. That's why we started, again, small and start building it out. And it's the same thing with issue 1. I try to make sure it's a human story among this big old crazy world with, Cobra Commander.
Yeah. God, I love Cobra Commander.
Me too.
Now, Tom, #1, the issue is great. That wraparound cover you did is unbelievable.
Yeah,
and it's gotten me thinking, just looking at the designs you've done for the Joes and the Cobras, they don't have a simple aesthetic to them, but they have a very clear, defined definition between them. How did you approach designing your versions of the Joes and the Cobras? Like, what kind of design aesthetics did you have in mind to keep them distinct from each other while still having their own kind of like flair?
I think the Joes are a little more military gear inspired, more grounded, not exactly real life inspiration. I took some inspiration from real life, like military gear, but I also usually fell back on the rule of cool, you know. Maybe if it didn't 100% make sense, but it looked cool, I'm adding it in. And just a bit more muted color schemes. I took some inspiration from the G.I. Joe Renegades TV show for the color schemes of the Joes, like a muted color palette. I thought those were really cool. And then the Cobras are like basically super villains. And also I took inspiration from wrestling for some of the characters because they got pretty outlandish outfits in wrestling, and you can get a lot more weird and fantastical with the designs of the Cobra characters. Some of them are more like regal, like Napoleonic sort of grand outfits. Just a bit less practical, a bit more weird, more colorful. There's a lot of bright reds, bright blues. So I just wanted to, and their weapons are also crazy too.
That was another.
We haven't, I don't know that we've seen any of those yet, but we will at some point. And there's a big disparity between the tech they use, and just I wanted to contrast them with more of a serious, grounded look for the Joes and a wacky sort of fantastical look for the Cobras.
With like the action figures having such a big impact on the series over time, is that something you're excited to play with for like their accessories? Because if you bought a G.I. Joe, you got like 8 guns, you got like a backpack, is that something you both are excited to play with, or are you looking to kind of define your own versions of this while using the Energon-esque-ness of the universe?
I didn't really base any of the weapons that they carried off of the toys, anything like that. Like the basic stuff, like Rock and Roll's got a huge gun, so I had to find a huge gun that like maybe a current use gun that is like standard issue, or even like being developed, stuff like that fits the times now. Because he had like an M60 or something that's like Vietnam War era big gun, so he would need an upgrade for that. I did not really, and I put a lot of thought into what people would use. The rule of cool was the last thing I thought. Is this cool more than does it really make sense? So
Tom did all the work, so I didn't have to. Like I would be like, gun, he has a gun, and then Tom would be like, what kind of gun? And then he goes, I mean, listen, like there's a scene in coming up where it was like, there's a particular part that involves a gun, and I'll go look at the toys, look at the research, but I also trust Tom to be the one to like really think about it and like put that extra level of thought into like why this gun, why this design, why this, and it's been really awesome to watch. I mean, we've been really lucky with Hasbro and sort of how they respond to us, like taking the framework and the same inspiration that they're taking with the new stuff, but then also doing our own versions on it, and like making the Energon universe of everything, including the costumes, it's like, because we're not, as much as I love the toys and I have all of them, as much as I love them, the book is not a toy ad. Like that is an awesome side effect, I guess, of the book, is people being like, oh, that's dope, I'm gonna go buy the toy, like that's great. But you'll notice, like with Tom's designs, like he's really putting his own spin on everything, like every little piece of what we're doing. There are moments where we might call out something very, very specific, but even then, Tom is still being like putting his own spin and making it the Energon universe of everything.
They very easily could have said, just make it look like the toys on the shelves.
Yeah, and they did.
You would think that might be what they would do, because they got toys to sell. They're a toy company.
Yeah,
you're looking at the toys, and they look different than the comic book. So it's very cool that they are letting us kind of go our own way with it, taking inspiration from the toys in places and for certain characters, but also drawing from all the different visuals of G.I. Joe, because there's a bunch of great sort of design work done across the brand, TV shows, comics, movies, all that. So
yeah, we've been really lucky with them. I mean, one of the things that you notice, because I'm a big fan of this property and I've been following it this whole time, and it's like when I'm because I'll watch the videos of them talking about their designs, right? Because they're pretty open about why they do the things they do. And if you look at what they're doing, they're coming out from the same place we are, where it's like, yes, they want these things to look cool. Yes, they want these things to have an air of authenticity to it. But really what they're doing when they're making these toys, and if you listen to Lenny, who's one of the head designers, he talks a lot, they're trying to tell you a story. Right? Like everything they do is about trying to tell you a story. Like they're really thinking about the story aspects of the toys and the fact that's it. And that's just what we're kind of at it too. Like everything we're doing is about trying to tell you a story, And so I think that's why the relationship with Hasbro has been so good, is they see what we're doing. That we're not just trying to throw stuff at the wall. We're really putting a lot of thought into the story. And it's funny with Tom, whenever Tom turns in a new design, he always has all this stuff explained on the side. It's awesome. I think I'm hoping we do some kind of source book at some point. It's just Tom's designs with his explanations and stuff. With
narrative is very important to a lot of designs, for sure. Duke in G.I. Joe's got scars on his face from his Duke series that were not there in the first, when he showed up. So, and you can see where he got hurt in Duke and where the scars are.
Do you keep concept pages like that? Like if you're designing a character and you're writing notes like that, are you keeping a concept page of this is where Duke's his aesthetic scarring is here? It's okay. Do you keep things like that?
Yeah, I got all those drawings. My art reps got those.
I love to hear that, just because I think that stuff is my favorite back matter. Now, with this book, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Josh, that this one came out kind of in a slower buildup when Transformers came hot out of the gates after Void Rivals. Was there any fear for you as a team? We're doing this in a couple miniseries, hoping to build the hype up before you went into G.I. Joe. Do you feel like that worked for your series, or?
Yeah, it did. I mean, clearly it did. I mean, the numbers on G.I. Joe so huge, it's clearly it worked. I definitely had moments of nervousness about it. I feel like I'm a bit of the nervous Nelly in the team sometimes. When it comes to some of the stuff we're doing, talking to Robert and Daniel and Sean Makowitz, who's the publisher at Skybound, and talking about Ben Abernathy, who's the executive editor. I always feel like I'm a little bit more of the impatient one, but I think one of the things you've done from the very beginning, and this is even how the Energon Universe was introduced, the fact that you did not know what Void Rivals was, and you did not know that Void Rivals was launching this universe and was going to have Transformers in it and have Jetfire at the end. You didn't know any of that. I think so much of what we're building is we want it to because we're not retelling anything, right? So it's we want there to be an air of unexpected, unpredictable. And that was a big part of why we did G.I. Joe differently. Robert was and it was funny because everybody was well, why didn't you start with G.I. Joe? And it's well, that was the obvious thing to do. Right? Just like we introduced Transformers in a weird way, right? They were introduced in Void Rivals, so we're introducing this way. So it was trying to find our own way of introducing all of these elements. And so that was part of it, was okay, well, we're building this out. And I think also with one of my pet peeves about G.I. Joe that dates back to being a kid watching the cartoon is the first mini was G.I. Joe versus Cobra. And the second mini, and this is the cartoon, I mean, the miniseries cartoon, it was the second one was G.I. Joe versus Cobra. And then the show starts and it is G.I. Joe versus Cobra. And Bazartan is there, but it's guess what? He works for Cobra. It's even back then I was oh, I wish that third story had been just the Dreadnoks, no Cobra. Because I wish it had been a bit more separated and then we got to see it build. But it's by the time you get to the cartoon, it was everything was built. Everything was built in the place it was going to be. There was very little moving around. Once you get to the movie, you can start moving around, but it was very little. With this, I was well, everything is separated. These characters are not together yet. There is no team. And even now the book is coming out, that team is still very fractured and not completely there yet. And it's going to be a while before they are. And there's going to be some twists and turns before we get there. And it's going to be a while. And it's I think starting off with the 4 books allowed us to show how fractured it was right out the gate, right? This is going to be different. So it's Duke is here, Cobra Commander is here, Destro is here, Starlet's here, and started seeing all these pieces. And it's Major Blood was working with Destro, but doesn't know what Cobra is. He has no idea what Cobra Commander is. And that's the funny thing is Duke, we went through all this stuff so far, and guess what? Duke still doesn't know what Cobra is. Reading that first issue and he sees that logo for the first time and he's what? So it's we're getting you're getting all these parts in different places and you're going to see how they start coming together. But even then, again, like we're so built around doing the unexpected, is even if those parts are coming together, there might be some explosions that blow them back apart again. So it's like, you know, you're going to see how these things sort of push and pull, because we never want to just become what it was before. It's still the Energon Universe version of it. So that's, you know, it's, I was definitely at the beginning a little nervous about the plan, but it worked. It worked. And here's, you know, G.I. Joe #1 coming out, and the sales are huge on it, and people are really excited. And it allowed us to, I mean, listen, it allowed us to have something like a Cobra Commander book. You know, it allowed us to have a book where he was the spotlight, he was the voice, and let him really breathe and introduce this new version of him to the world and see how different he was from what had come before, but was still Cobra Commander. You know, it was like still very much Cobra Commander, but this is a different take on him. And so, you know, the spirit is still very much there, but we wouldn't have been able to do that. That was actually reasons why the Cobra Commander book exists, because very early on, I was on a call with Robert and Daniel, and we were talking so much about Cobra Commander, and it was like, we're not going to have the room to do this, and unless we have a Cobra Commander book. And we were just like, we need to have a Cobra Commander book. And I remember Robert was like, are you going to write it? And I was like, well, I kind of have to. I was like, I have to do it. You know, there's no way I can't. But that, again, we were able to do that because we started the way we did. We wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. Yeah.
The everything with Cobra Commander, and then someone unfamiliar with G.I. Joe before this stuff. Like I've seen the toys. I've seen only in passing because I'm a nerd. I've seen it.
Oh yeah.
Cobra Commander.
Yeah.
From my introduction and knowing in passing, Cobra Commander and Destro are divas. They're both just larger than life. They both seem to be very flamboyant in their costume, their design. They always have like very flashy costumes. Is that something you are looking to incorporate in your designs with them, Tom? Like, are we going to be seeing them have different lavish outfits throughout the series? Or are you trying to stick to kind of like one aesthetic, especially with their faces being such iconic?
You got to see some of the older designs for those characters. I'll let Top.
Maybe with Destro, there would be a couple other looks, because he does like to dress up in his lavish suits and his coats. And
there's like a pink coat I've seen, which is like the greatest figure ever.
Yeah, I had that here with the sunglasses, the gold sunglasses.
The Prophet Director. Yeah.
Director, awesome. I mean, Cobra Commander, you know, wears his big jackets and he loves a cape. You know, it's like
he's got the cape. I wanted to give him.
I love you gave him like the Napoleon look, basically. Like you gave him this very, it's funny how I always feel like
it's a bit more extra than his standard design with the blue jacket.
There's an interesting military and militant, and then you take militant and you do the pomp and circumstance version of militant, and as we start getting into Cobra Commander, where it's like, you know, there's a lot more flair to this look than you would expect. It's not so. There is nothing plain about Cobra. Okay, there's nothing basic about Cobra Commander and Destro. Like, I mean, I think one of the things you did that was really cool was that we always talk about how Destro, some of the cooler versions of Destro has like a theme of like tiger print, you know, and
the leopard print,
and you put that inside the lining of his jacket and stuff.
Of course,
dude, yeah.
And Destro comes from like a line of he's like medieval, his origin. From like the 100 Years War or something. I don't know if that's the actual war, but I've never seen him like decked out in any like medieval gear or anything. I wanted to kind of include like a sweet pauldron and like knight gauntlets and stuff.
Yeah, because he's a knight.
Like he's got some messed up sense of honor that kind of it plays into the knightly look.
Yeah,
so
they're so fun, dude, and. Yeah, again, this is why I love Cobra. They have such a cool look to them.
Josh, when you're writing something that deals so heavily with G.I. Joe is a military style book, is it ever a fear of yours that when you're writing something like this, you may dip too far into like a pro-military rhetoric, or is that something you're trying to?
No, I mean, I try to just make sure it's fun. I try to focus in on that and try to make sure it's fun and try to, but you know, if you read Duke, you know, you see that Baroness and Duke actually talk about this. And I think that's the way to do it, is you have to sort of come at it from both sides and have actual characters voicing it within line with those characters. Like Duke and Baroness having that conversation, and Clutch is there too. But them having essentially this conversation, it's very much in the perspective of Duke, and then Baroness playing the other side of that, right? So I always feel like we kind of acknowledged it early on. But then beyond that, I mostly just try to zero in on it being like an action fun book, and there's so much weird shit happening all the time that it's like I just sort of make sure I have that and not try to get too much down that path. I mean, listen, I come from a military family and stuff, so it's like that's definitely been a part of my life. But that's also why, when you go back and look at the original cartoon, look at the comics, like all those pieces were there, but at the end of the day, it was just like, it was so much more about the characters. And so that's where really my head is always at. It's just much more about the characters than trying to go down any of those kinds of paths, because I don't think that would be that entertaining for anybody.
Yeah.
And I want people to have fun when they're reading these books. So that's really where my head always is with it.
That Baroness Duke exchange is like, the issue with them talking together is just phenomenal, especially the reveal. That art is top notch.
Oh man, yeah, Tom killed it on that issue. It was always like we tried to, both books. If you really look at Cobra Commander and Duke, they really were parallel to each other. They were running the same path, but going in different directions. Where Duke went from being disillusioned and feeling left out to suddenly becoming, going back in and feeling like he has some kind of trust, and now he understands what's happening. And then Cobra Commander starting off being incredibly loyal, and then by the ending being like, no, I'm going out on my own and doing my own thing. I'm leaving Cobra Law behind. But even things like, issue 2 of both issues have a little more action, and in 3, not to say they're talking head issues, but it's like in 3, of Duke, it's like Baroness and Duke having the conversation in the prison cells. But then over in Cobra Commander, it was Cobra Commander being interrogated by the Dreadnoks. And so you're learning something about both characters through very different things we don't really expect. Like both were basically locked up, at the midway point of both stories, but having two completely, it's very thematically the same conversation. And you're learning something about Duke, and you're learning something about Cobra Commander in a way through other people, through Baroness and through the Dreadnoks, that you might not normally expect. And that was, again, like I put a lot of thought into how these books were going to run next to each other and then how they would collide. And, it's, I love that there's that line in the first issue. This is probably the only spoiler I'll say, but there's that line in the first issue where Cobra Commander sees Duke and says, "This man is insane." And that's one of my favorite parts of the first issue.
Thank you both for being here. I'm so excited for everyone to get to read G.I. Joe on November 13th. Is there anything else people should be picking up from either of you right now as well?
I also write Superman.
Kind of a big one.
But I also write Superman. There's other D stuff I've worked on, like the All-In stuff. But mostly I would want everybody to pick up G.I. Joe. Let's keep Duke. This train going and keep on buying Boy Rivals and buying Transformers.
Yes, please buy all of these.
I'm only working on G.I. Joe. Yeah, I got nothing else. Covers here and there, but mostly G.I. Joe.
Thank you both for being here. You can catch us at gatecrashers.fan.
Right.
Gatecrashers.